afternoon and welcome back to the panel, the Western Balkans, Cyber Diplomacy for Cybersecurity. What capacities do we need to tackle cyber threats in this region, and why do we need diplomacy and cross-border cooperation? Speakers in this panel will be Karsten Diethelm de Geier, Senior Advisor for Cyber Diplomacy in Center for Humanitarian Dialogue, Vladimir Radunović, Director of Cybersecurity and E-Diplomacy, Diplo, Irina, Rizmal, Manager for Cybersecurity and Privacy Practice, PwC Serbia, and moderator in this panel will be Amer Kapetanović, Head of Political Department in the Regional Cooperation Council. Please, floor is yours.
Hoćemo mešano?
You're the guest.
So, good afternoon to everyone. Thank you for being here. I know this is we are approaching towards the end of the working day, so I think everybody is tired, and still we have some people in the audience, which is good, I think, for the discussion. I would just repeat what everyone in this room and beyond knows, that actually we live in digital age. Our lives are intertwined with digital concept of how to live, what to do, and thus we are also very much exposed to digital threats and vulnerabilities. In last Security Meter, we do every year Regional Cooperation Council, Public Opinion Sentiment Index on Security, wide range of security issues, one of them being cybersecurity. We have noticed raising concerns among the ordinary people about their exposure to cyber threats. And not only that, also they ask clearly for more cooperation. And then they expect clearly from their governments to do more. And actually, this is the excellent opportunity. We have an excellent panel, which has already been announced, to discuss this issue, but also to discuss something which is, and I know that Karsten would a little bit disagree with me, but it's okay to disagree, which is as elusive as cyber itself, cyber diplomacy. What is the cyber diplomacy? What it is all about? Is it actually contextualized normatively in the same way as the traditional diplomacy, or it should be contextualized in a different way? So, Karsten, please, I would, if you allow me, start with you. Having in mind your experience, and especially as someone who, and it caught my attention, particularly one line of your biography, that you actually played a pivotal role in reaching a deal within the OSCE on 2 cybersecurity packages. So what would you say first about what is the cyber diplomacy? And how do you see the cyber diplomacy in the context of the Western Balkans from your experience, please?
So we got about 3-4 hours?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, okay. We have...
No, thanks for the question. Honestly, when I started to get engaged in this field, I was asking myself the same questions. And I was nervous. And I found out that cyber diplomacy is, in essence, just diplomacy. And it deals with a relatively new field or new challenge to international relations, which is the growing importance of information and communication technology in all fields of life. If I may add, earlier today here in the confines of the Belgrade Security Conference, we played a little tabletop exercise, and we confronted the participants with a scenario in which you have, one day you wake up and you read in the news that a neighboring country in the region is having a victim to a cyber operation. You know, it's some serious stuff, the electrical grid doesn't work anymore, and so on. And as the scenario escalates, it grows from a technical into a domestic political crisis in that country, then it spills over into the wider region, and it grows into a serious international crisis. And the scenario asks participants at every level how they would react. The point was to drive home that a cyber incident can escalate from something which is purely technical, which is dealt with by the IT experts, into something where you need to involve at some point, diplomats, and at some point maybe even political decision makers. And the tools are there. The question is how you use. It's a little bit like playing in an orchestra, where as you go through a symphony, you have various, at various stages in the symphony, you have various instruments playing and playing different melodies. But if you're a good musician, you know how to use the instruments in order to arrive to a harmonious ending, and that's of course what we want to do.
And for that, you need a conductor who understands, who can conduct the orchestra, who can also play all the instruments. Which in this case, particularly in cyber diplomacy, is very important to have this coherence, this coordination and communication, which also goes to adoption with of clear set of rules and standards. So, Vladimir, please, how do you see from your perspective as being someone who is teaching, postgraduates and graduates about that? How would you let's say, theoretically and practically frame it?
Maybe building up on this good analogy of a concert and the conductor and the whole band. So one thing is that in that band, you have to have all these instruments. And cyber is a very specific space, and cybersecurity is a specific feature. Firstly, it's by and large, it's global. It's cross-border. Most of the incidents are cross-border. Anyone in Brazil or someone in Brazil can attack someone here. Someone from here can attack someone in Thailand. Most of crimes, most of cyber or political incidents are cross-border. So that's one thing. The other thing, it's a mix of technology, legal aspects, political aspects. So it's a complex setting, which means that there is no one-man band, basically. You need what the Americans usually call whole of the state and whole of the society approach. And I think sometimes we understand the whole of the state. Okay, it's not just the Ministry of Security, we need the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, we need a Ministry of Education, Ministry of IT, but we sometimes miss the other part, which is whole of society. If in that case of an incident, where suddenly the telecom infrastructure, or the energy sector, the hospitals don't work, as we have seen a number of times around the world, someone from the government picks the phone and says, what do we do now? Who's attacking? We don't know. This is some IP protocol which we can follow. What's the IP protocol? So you have to ask the techies. The techies can exchange the information, but someone has to do a political coordination. So it has to go hand in hand, and that's precious. Building that we like as a buzzword, a multi-stakeholder community or public-private partnership, and I'm sure Irina can tell much more about that, how that works. So that's a part of that component. And then, of course, a lot of rules, but we can get back to the rules afterwards.
But no doubt, actually, what both of you gentlemen just rightly pointed out, and I think it's very important to underline it once again, you need to have a center of operation, which is embedded in the government, which is conducting this kind of orchestra. So you rightly pointed out with this exercise, which particularly caught my attention, if there is a miscommunication happening, if someone is missing in the information exchange chain, everything can go totally in the wrong direction, and it can even cause a bigger trauma, let alone conflict.
And I think that's the point. It can actually, it's not just whether the hospital will continue working, is that if there is a miscalculation that the attack came from a neighboring country with whom we might have tensions, it can, maybe not easily, but it could potentially turn into political escalation, if not a military one. So it's a serious issue. Cyber is not a thing for geeks. Cyber is absolutely not a thing for geeks. I mean, it is for geeks, but not only for them.
This brings us, Irina, to you, definitely. Having in mind your experience of being involved also in the private sector, how do you see actually the potential in the Western Balkans for the private enterprises and other stakeholders to be involved in this orchestra, to use this analogy, because I think obviously that's very important. What your experience, and I know you have some says from Serbia, but it can be maybe replicate to the rest of the region.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I'll try not to repeat what was already said, but I definitely emphasize the need for a whole of society approach, which means a public-private partnership. So in terms of a national response, I agree you need to have this central coordinating entity. But if you look at private sector entities who will have their international, like global webs of different firms, and civil society is also part of different civil society networks, either in the region or global. We all have our links to, external actors and knowledge sharing and information, which we can then feed to this central coordinating entity, whether this is information about an attack or a threat actor that has emerged, or some good practice or knowledge. We can contribute. But in order to do so, there needs to be an established communication with this central coordinating entity. And I think public-private partnerships are the way forward.
What is my understanding? We have more or less legal framework in every economy in the region for what you just described. But what is the missing link is human resources, is clearly, if I may call it, the political support or the awareness among the governments how to deal with that. What would you say, actually, Karsten? What could be that magic formula to kind of, should we, just to maybe rephrase my question, should we start with a raising awareness campaign, Urbi et Orbi, and then maybe include the governments as well? Or should we hold them accountable for not doing what is written in the legislation?
You're definitely asking the wrong person.
I knew you were going
to. When I was doing this for the German government, we were struggling with building a good national cybersecurity architecture. And I know that my successors have been struggling with this, and we do have a national cybersecurity architecture, but whether it's good, whether it's perfect, I wouldn't dare judging. And I know that other governments have been fighting the same fight in their countries, and that they all ask if their structures are good and appropriate. However, let me add one point to which I'm very attached. It's important not only for you to have such an architecture, but also to inform others about it.
Yeah.
Because others, in case of a cross-border cyber incident, others need to be able to understand how you are responding and why you are responding this way. They need to know this for two reasons. One, they will want to know who, if they have questions, to whom they can address their questions and what to expect as an answer. But also, if they're seeing an action from you, they will want to be able to understand why you're taking this action, what structures within and procedures within your own system make you behave a certain way. Because this kind of calculability, being calculable, makes you much more predictable and contributes greatly to international stability.
I know would you agree with me, but I think also a very important aspect is to define what is the attack. When now I'm switching from cyber diplomacy as a concept to cybersecurity as such. Do we need to have a definition for that? Do we need to have a harmonized definition throughout the region or the multi-stakeholder platform, and what that could be?
Let's go back one step what cybersecurity is. And for instance, in the OSCE, and I think Karsten can say probably much more how the definitions in the OSCE were there was an attempt to try to understand how each country understands cybersecurity. What does it mean for them? And actually, Serbia was the one who took over the role of collecting all the definitions from the OSCE countries. There is an excellent database created on how each country defines all of these terms. But that's cybersecurity, that's information security, other terms which are important. Cyber war, cyber attack, and particularly how that relates in the context of existing international law. So, for instance, we have the UN Charter, which says that you have the right to self-defense. If someone attacks you, you have the right to defense. Firstly, what does it mean, an armed attack in cyberspace? Does it mean destruction only? Yeah. Does it have to have destruction? Is digital destruction destruction? Do you have to have victims? Do you have to have actually lethal consequences? We don't know. There have been a lot of negotiations in the UN. Now, we have a progress where we have about a dozen countries, mainly developed ones or more advanced, which are developing their own understanding, coming out with their own positions of how international law applies. The other question is, if someone attacks me, I have the right to self-defense. How? If it is a cyber attack, can I just shoot them back with a hacking? Yeah. Or can I actually use the planes and stuff? Now, what can we do with the smaller countries in that context? Firstly, we have to have capacities in the institutions and ministries, and particularly Ministry of Foreign Affairs, I can get back to that later, to be able to understand the complexity and sit down as a national community, sit down and maybe even regional, and have an agreement, what do we think as the application of international law in cyber means? Maybe piggyback on those positions of France, Germany, US, UK, China, Russia, it doesn't matter. That's one of the things we need to do. So it's a lot of open questions, but I think the prerequisite for that is actually having capacities and mandates in the ministries, which we don't have in the region. And if you just take a look around the room, how many people you actually see from the ministry staying at the cybersecurity panel? Yeah, we are important. We would love to have the full room, right? But it's not about that. It's really whenever it's cyber, you feel like, that's interesting with diplomats. I don't know whether you felt that. Diplomats are usually proud to know everything because they have to, because that's their job. When it comes to cyber, they almost wear a proud badge. I don't know anything about that, which has to change. It's a political issue. So next time we need to have the full room. And I guess that's political awareness, yeah.
Yeah, and there is an additional question, which which I deem very important indeed. If you build this international law infrastructure or the normative framework for the cyber diplomacy, if I may call it this way, and you already have well-advanced countries, European Union as an entity itself, but also Germany, big countries, what is the probability and likelihood that those who are not advanced well, in the concept, in the normative, in infrastructure, to be left behind? And what could be then the detrimental potential of that? Irina, maybe if you want, but I'm looking at you as well because I know you have this kind of theoretical also background and knowledge. So,
do you want to start with the theoretical and then we can follow with the practical?
You know that I can always talk. Now, as we discussed previously, I think the risk is exactly, and that's one of the reasons why Karsten is doing the exercise. The reason is that the wars and the conflicts basically start mainly in those countries that you mentioned, not among the big ones, right, sometimes. But that's the risk. The risks may be in Balkans, the risk may be in Middle East, in Africa, in Asia, where you have tensions. And we need that framework the most, probably. We need some sort of rules, if nothing, then committing to the confidence-building measures that the OSCE, that we are all members of in the region, have brought up. So only if we, but seriously commit that, not like with the laws that you mentioned in our countries where we have the laws, but we don't actually implement them. So we need to commit to that and really do it politically. And that's, I guess, the first step.
Okay, well, saying in the partially theoretical part, I think that cyber diplomacy, if done properly, could help alleviate some of the tensions that we have at the political level, either in this region or other regions, because if you don't keep it at the highest level of politics, you might use cyber diplomacy to avoid certain situations escalating further than they should, because an incident has been misinterpreted. You had a script kiddie attacking another country rather than it being a state-sponsored attack. But if there's tension going on, it might be misrepresented and then escalate further into the political, physical domain or whatever else. And if you look at cybercrime, for example, I mean, criminals don't care about boundaries, they don't care about politics, and they're either way a step ahead of us, and not having these political bottlenecks and tensions as stopping them from cooperating will just make them even more advanced.
Can I just also
comment,
please?
Sure, of course. We have time. We have 3 hours, you said. I mean, so please.
Well, and we can also go into the weekend. But you asked about how to basically bring more countries into the discussion, into the debate. Yeah. Let me just maybe explain a little bit how this whole thing has evolved. So the discussion really began sometime in the 1990s in the UN, and it was the Russians who said, we need to talk about information security. And at the time, most people looked at the Russians and said, what have you been smoking? But they persisted, and then the United Nations did what is a typical response if you're confronted with an issue and you don't know how to address it. They decided to create a working group. That was called the Group of Government Experts. And first, this group of government experts met and couldn't agree a consensus report. A second group, actually, then in 2010, presented a consensus report which had one very important sentence. It said, information and communication technologies are among the most pertinent threats to international peace and security in the 21st century. So cyber as a threat was for the first time recognized internationally in 2010, and a whole slate of further expert groups have tried to dive deeper into the issue, dig deeper. But these were small groups. Max, the largest group had 25 members. So it was very much an elite discussion. And since 2020, there has been a change because these expert groups in the United Nations have been first complemented and then supplanted by an open-ended working group. Now, the open-ended working group is very interesting because all UN member states are invited to participate. And what happened is very interesting, because I've been both at the expert groups and in the open-ended working group. And the open-ended working group, all of a sudden, all UN member states literally all of them are taking the floor, are participating, which means that all governments at some level have to engage in the discussion. They have to think this through, because you don't just take the floor in the United Nations. You have to have a position before, and you have to have had an internal debate before you formulate an official position. So all governments have been basically forced to start thinking about this. The other thing that has happened is that you're not digging any deeper, you're just staying more at the surface. So instead of diving, you're swimming. But still, it's very important at this stage that you have a much broader debate than you had before 2020. And that's a good thing, because cyber, as Vladimir was pointing out before, cyber affects every country, and from every country you can potentially have a threat emanating to your own country. And now, for the first time, you're having everybody engaged in this discussion. So that's a good step forward.
Maybe one interesting bit to that, sorry, what Karsten said is that all countries can contribute to the open-ended working group, but not all of them do.
Yes,
And
right.
the statistics from the Balkans shows that we had one representative in that closed group that was a representative of Serbia by accident or by choice, and the closed group of about 20. No one else. Since the open-ended working group started, so it's an open for everyone, but it's in New York. We basically have the New York missions. We basically had, I think, till last year, about a handful of contributions by Serbia, 2 of them by Montenegro, and I think actually none by the other Balkan countries, except for aligning with the EU position. And that's understandable, because the missions in New York are very small. There are 2 to 3 people covering everything from migrations to war in Ukraine to cyber. They don't have capacity. And secondly, they don't have anyone in the capitals who can help them. So, it's again working on how to make sure that they actually use that opportunity and be able to talk.
What is your experience in dealing with the government here? Because I know that you had one. I mean, can you share from the perspective of the private sector?
Well,
Because
I mean, I had experience in the civil society sector as well. So before joining PwC, I was working on a regional capacity building program for cybersecurity, dealing with competent ministries, national certs, and other relevant stakeholders. I mean, my impression then and now is that the community of people working on this topic does have the will to work on it efficiently. It's just that a matter of whether they have the right tools or capacities themselves, which is not always, up to them. It's up to the political setup. For example, the jurisdiction of national certs and what is defined in the law that they can or cannot do. It's about political will of, whether they really want to focus on cyber and make national cybersecurity strategies really, broad and, stepping out of the comfort zone, or if they just keep repeating what they do year on year. So, it's like shortcomings and opportunities at different levels. In terms of private sector experience, we worked with both public and private sector entities, not just in Serbia or the region, but across the EU. And you see the same challenges everywhere, in terms of capacity, in terms of funding, in terms of decision makers, whether these are national decision makers or decision makers within large companies who don't have adequate awareness or understanding of the need to really pay close attention to cybersecurity, because it's always, it's the intangible threat. You can't quantitate it before it actually materializes. So, you don't see the reason to invest in something that might not never happen. But then when it happens, the consequences can be grave.
And it happened, actually. It happened just recently in Montenegro, it happened in Albania, and it happened in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and the response was very weak.
I think it happened in most of our countries, even if we don't know.
Even that. This is what I wanted to, which is even worse. Which means that the radars are not set well. And we have to do something with it. So, but just to wrap up, because I think it could be very interesting for the second round before we open the questions for the audience. So we said commitment is important. It seems like we have a commitment in the Western Balkans. Political will is even more important. It seems like we have it, at least on the paper. Cyber diplomacy, as you rightly pointed out, might alleviate potential risks that come from cyber threats. What we are missing, I think, in the Western Balkans is a framework, is a regional framework. In a couple of days from now, leaders of France, Montenegro, and Slovenia are going to sign in Tirana at the Summit of Berlin process this memorandum or agreement on this Center of Cybersecurity in Podgorica. So we are going, for the first time ever, going to have the Center for Capacity Building. But we do not still have any platform or any working group which is going to touch on measures that you, Vladimir, said. Those are the measures how to harmonize and to create the regional framework. What is my question to you here, and to all three of you? We have all this at the level of the European Union. We have European Union cyber diplomacy toolbook. We do have a clearly set of standards how to reply and how to harmonize the response, even to the level of the sanctions. Of course, definition of threats and everything else. Would it be, and maybe this is a dumb question, but please be gentle with me. I mean, I'm just asking out of my own curiosity. Wouldn't it be much easier then to try to push the Western Balkans more into that framework? Because the buzzword now is diving into single market of the European Union. So can we also dive into a single cyber, let's say, framework of the European Union? Would that be much easier than to try to kind of establish something sui generis for the Western Balkans itself? So let's start with you, and then, yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I think what we miss as a first step is any sort of political discussion on cyber, and we don't have it. You have some very light discussions within the Western Balkans Digital Summit.
Yeah.
But it's really very superficial. It's mainly multi-stakeholder. It's not a political dialogue, actually, on cyber. Within the open Balkans, we don't have anything on cyber. We are on infrastructure, on digitalization. We actually don't have anything on cybersecurity. If you look at the main meetings like Brdo Kranj or the others, they don't have cybersecurity at the agenda. So we don't have any regional, none of the regional institutions actually discuss. There is no regional process. So that's the first thing that we need to have. I mean, the solid one, right? I hope you have some other information.
I do. I'm looking at Tanya and I have to contradict, but please finish and I will explain.
Sure. And I would be happy to hear. When was it? 2016, 17. We did a study. There was a bunch of people from this region doing a study on the regional organizations and cooperation about cybersecurity. And the result was there was something by Rakvijak, there was a little bit by RESPA, something done by RCC, but nothing really that you can step on and say this is solid. So that's the first thing we need to put it on the political agenda. And secondly, even if we want to devise regional rules, I'm not sure we need them to that extent. But even if we need them, and even if we decide to take the European ones, are we actually going to implement? As always, that's the weakest link here. What we have the OSCE confidence building measures. We all submitted to that. We need to implement them. And they're I mean, pretty practical to implement. We have the UN norms. We need to implement them. Yes, we have EU cybersecurity toolbox and other legislation which is coming, like CRA, NIS2, and so on, which are coming to the Balkans. That will certainly help. The main question for me is not reinventing the wheel. It's how do we actually implement everything that we signed.
Yeah, it's hard to contradict you on that because, as I mentioned, we had cyber attacks and we had zero response. And there is a great likelihood that something like that might repeat again. Karsten, before you forget what I wanted to ask.
I have basically two answers, and they're not entirely coherent, which is always a problem, but it's a sign of a diplomat. But the first answer is that because the future of the countries of the Western Balkans is in European integration, I would encourage the countries to ensure that the regulations align as closely and as quickly as possible with European regulations and structures and institutions. And that, I think, also will make then responses to incidents like cyber incidents easier. So I'm not certain it would be a good idea to now invent a set of rules, norms, procedures that are oriented towards the region and may not be entirely consistent with European norms and rules and regulations and institutions. But that's because, as I say, of the overarching perspective of European integration for the countries of the region. The second opinion I hold, and it's, as I say, it's not entirely coherent with the first opinion, is that in particular, the confidence building, the OSCE confidence building mechanisms and the crisis management mechanisms that we have designed, they're good, and I'm very proud of them. But they're sometimes very heavy. And it may be necessary, or maybe a good idea, to supplement them with something more nimble, something more pliable for the region. Because basically what the OSCE crisis management mechanisms, if you transplant them to the cyber field, mean is that you see something which you have about which you have a question, then officially submit a question to the country that you think is on the other side. That country has 48 hours to respond. If you're not happy with the response, then you go to a second round in which you involve the chairman in office and other interested countries. And so, it's a very complex and very quickly also a very open procedure. And cyber doesn't like openness very often. It may be preferable to have more informal procedures, more informal communication mechanisms at various levels, between the CERTs, between the technical experts, between diplomats doing cyber in the various capitals, and if necessary also maybe between the governments, between the ministers. So the Minister of the Interior knows who to call. The Minister of the Interior in Belgrade knows who to call in Tirana if he wants to talk or if she wants to talk about cyber. These kinds of more direct communication links might be, I think, extremely helpful to the region and compatible with whatever is going on at the EU and UN levels?
Yeah, this is really very diplomatic answer, I must admit. Underneath you, behind it, such an answer you see, and actually I tend to agree with you that Western Balkans simply is not at the level of coherence of European Union. And it cannot be under given circumstances. So maybe what you said, using what we can do and try to work a little bit on applicability and norms sui generis for the Western Balkans might be a temporary solution. Irina?
Yeah, well, I first want to agree with Vlada. I think implementation is the pain point of the region at all levels. So we have wonderful things on paper, but then we lack the implementation. In the case of Serbia, there is a draft law, the update of a law on information security, which is aimed to align as much as possible with the NIS2 directive. So at least in our case, I can say that we are trying to quickly respond to what the EU is doing. In terms of cooperation and communication at all levels, again, absolutely agree. And I think that I know that there have been and are still ongoing several donor-driven projects across the region, which have been supportive of communication at different levels. I presume that because of the political situation in the region, the decision was to first focus on the operational levels, and this has been going quite well with the support of the UK FCDO and the project that's now, I think, in its 5th year or something like that, which focused on operational people at competent ministries, national certs, but also the wider community in terms of involving also public sector actors and sometimes civil society. And I think it has done a great job in terms of actors getting to know each other, and even if there are not specific procedures, if something happens in one country, they know who to call in the other country and try to solve this issue. I think now is the time to raise this bar a bit, and from what I understand, there are some new projects that are already operational now that will focus more on this political level dialogue, for example, sponsored by the European Union. So I hope, I wish them all the best.
Me too. Yeah, actually, basically, before I open the floor for the audience, just to wrap up once again this part of our conversation, political agenda is very important. Implementability is an issue, and that's quite obvious in the Western Balkans. So there are standards, rules, there are even national legislation which are not implemented. Our understanding in RCC, and Tanya, please correct me if I'm wrong, so I have a real expert here, I'm just pretending that I'm one. People are complaining about the lack of resources, and human resources and financial resources to really to create this intergovernmental and within the country's framework. You also, Karsten mentioned something which is very important, this informal communication. So learning by doing, but also as we are waiting to one day become maybe part of the bigger entity, the supranational cyber diplomacy to use the framework. We do have that framework, and this is what I wanted to contradict with you, because RCC has the first organization that established the first platform for computer security incident response team in the Western Balkans. We got them together. We also work closely with ENISA, European agency, trying to, as much as we can, learn from them and copy-paste from them in the Western Balkans. And of course, within that platform, there are informal connections and exchange of information, which is very important. Still, however, something is missing. Something is badly missing in the capacity of countries to respond. And maybe we still have time. Irina, what do you do in your organization when something like cyber attack happens?
That's confidential.
It's confidential.
No, I mean, the key is having, first of all, some procedures in place, right? You need to have somewhere written down what you do in case of A, B, or C happens. But I think the key is, and what we see in both like small businesses, civil society organizations, large enterprise, is that you expect that if you first of all, you think cyber costs a lot.
Yeah.
And it's an immediate no from top management because they don't want to invest that much, especially with the current economic situation. But in terms of having like the basic of the basic cybersecurity, it doesn't have to cost much because you can have the most expensive cybersecurity solution. But if there's someone on the other end who doesn't know what to do with it or doesn't follow suggestions, for example, you need to patch this application, you know, the solution is worthless. So I think that what we try to emphasize with whomever we work is going back to the awareness raising bit, where you need to have an understanding of what cybersecurity is, what are the potential risks and threats, and what could be the potential consequences. And this needs to happen at all levels of the organization. So not just, you know, blaming Joe over there for clicking on a phishing link, but also, you know, having management understand the role of the CISO within the organization and supporting them to actually, you know, promote the message of cybersecurity.
And when something like that happened, you report it to some governmental institutions in Serbia, because you are based here. I suppose that this is the standard rules of procedure.
Yes, yes. I mean, okay, we're not a critical entity, so by law we're not obliged, but I think there are a lot of stakeholders in Serbia who proactively report to the national CERT just for the sake of the national CERT having some baseline statistic on, you know, how to frame future messages for sound cybersecurity action, reaction, and response. And I think this is a loophole that we've been stuck in Serbia for a while, whereby other entities say we don't want to report to the national CERT because we don't really get anything from the national CERT. But then the national CERT is not able to provide them with any sound advice because they don't have any information to base statistics on past events, threats, and attacks. So it's kind of a enchanted circle at the moment.
From whichever angle we look at this, it looks like we need more cooperation within the region. We need more exchange. We need more implementability. We need more awareness among, of course, the main stakeholders and the general public. But also we need capacity building. So capacity building will be sorted out through this center, but the rest of the story relies on maybe one of couple of leading regional organizations that maybe gather all stakeholders and to ignite the discussion. My impression, however, is, and I don't know whether you are going to agree with this, we also have this butterfly trajectory when it comes to cybersecurity. And I mean by that, you know, all of a sudden some things start to be sexy, cyber diplomacy. And all donors goes to that direction, forgetting some other elements which are very important. So I think that sometimes we also need a coherence among donor community, not only coherence when it comes to the governments. But having said so, now I'm happy to open the question for the audience. Please introduce yourself. Try to be focused on questions, not that much comments if possible. So please, the floor now is yours.
I think they're frightened. We succeeded.
So then I'll go back to you. You have to talk more. I'm sorry.
Maybe one reaction to what you
mentioned. Yeah, please.
Which and basically back to how you react to the incident, that cooperation in the region. When you mentioned the cooperation of the CERTs that you also lead, there is solid cooperation on non-political levels, on technical level, on civil society level, on business level. There is solid cooperation in the region. There is a cooperation, as you mentioned, between the national authorities, those called CERTs, Maybe not among all of them, but it's moving. But that means they might have an information that something is happening. They might share that information, but sometimes you need a political reaction on that, which is missing. So what we miss is a political coordination. I'll give you an example. These days, or just as we speak, there seems to be a huge campaign, let's say coming from Russia, it really doesn't matter who's behind, against some of the countries in the Balkans, I think Albania and the others, with so-called DDoS attacks, which are making the systems not responding, slowing down, blocking them. And there is a political connotation of that mentioned in the messages, because those are the proxy groups, hacking groups, that they basically also defend Serbia. So there are now some Albanian groups which might be striking back using those vulnerabilities, technical ones in the systems, where we see today and yesterday some of the major telecom providers here slowing down. It has to do about something with Palestine and Israel, not directly, so it's a very complex issue. Now the technical community knows about it. The technical community shares the information. The problem is, can that escalate? And if it starts escalating, and I mean escalate by having a major telecom down, or having, as we said, the energy sector down, or something else, what's going to be the reaction of those up? And when we mentioned, we did that exercise a couple of years ago, there is probably one of the rare models of cooperation, public-private cooperation, the Cybersecurity network in Serbia, which really gathers all the stakeholders around, including the government. When we did the exercise of how does a country react to a cyber attack like that, and we said, okay, now we have a political moment. You have to call together, I don't know, the Security Council of the country, or something like, or the ministers, and so on. How much time do you need to get them? Well, you know, one is traveling here, the other one has a high-level meeting. They said, well, probably in a week time. Week time? Cyber attack escalates within minutes. Now, that's the problem, this link between the operational levels and the politicians. And that's where I say we need more cooperation of the politicians and their understanding of why this is a multi-stakeholder picture. Just as an example, yeah. No, we frighten people even more.
Yeah, I think so. Vladimir, I have to admit, I am not 100% sure whether those linkages that exist at the technical expert level, whether they are that strong. The other day I was talking to somebody, and we were discussing, would you be in the event of a major cyber incident affecting your country, and you're suspecting it's coming from another country in the region, would you know, or from another actor in the region, would you know who to call? And the response was, yes, of course I know these people, we're on LinkedIn together. And I said, would you call them? No, because I don't have the political backing to do so. That's a problem. So that's why I say you might need some arrangements or some political agreement on procedures informally to complement what we've agreed in Vienna. Because what we've agreed in Vienna, that's shouting from the mountain, whereas I think very often what you need is more pillow talk. Confidential.
Yeah, I just like that. I mean, yes, the links between the national asserts that I mentioned are more or less informal because they personally know each other, so they know who to call. But whether it would be an official request via email, that's another question. And in terms of having any level of guidelines or frameworks or whatever, I think exercising them is also quite important. So, okay, you will have this capacity building center, but if these capacities are developed in silo, then, until you put them either through a technical exercise or through a tabletop and see, what it would really look like when you work through a scenario of an attack, you can put a badge on LinkedIn, then you have the capacity, but whether you actually know it in practice, that's questionable.
Yeah. Have you been provoked enough? So please, we have a question, gentleman over there. Bravo. Is there a mic, please?
Thank you. First of all, thank you for a very interesting debate and for actually provoking which I hope I'm not the only one who's being provoked here. I'm Amer from Bosnia and Herzegovina, strategic analysis. One interesting thing that we haven't really touched upon is the artificial intelligence, which I think we all agree is very important at this present moment in 2023. I'm interested at how does artificial intelligence play into the general outlook of the topic at hand, cyber diplomacy for cybersecurity, especially when it comes to the sort of wider context of revitalized active measures policy approach by the Russian Federation. Thank you.
Very concrete question to address to all panelists. Okay.
I'll start with the theory.
Please.
Yeah, the theory says that it's really a new topic, especially in this region, but even globally. So we have cybersecurity challenges of the AI systems. And I'm sorry, I can't look directly at you, otherwise I'll have a neck problem. So we have a possibility of hacking the AI systems, right? That's one clear concern, which is maybe more technical. It fits into cybersecurity in general. And they have that's where you have a number of levels. You might have a problem with the software, you might have a problem with the algorithm, you might have a problem with databases. That's a new problem. So hacking and changing the databases can actually result with an output of an AI which we didn't envisage, and we might not even be able to see that it's different from what we should get. Now, the other level is the application of AI in things like weapons, where we have the whole discussion about what's called lethal autonomous weapon systems, or killer robots, or whatever you like. And there is a global process within one of those UN pillars, another group of experts there, as you said, when you have a problem, you find a group, working group, and they haven't moved much, but there seems to be an interest by the big ones now to push for some sort of agreement how far that killer robots should go, or where they shouldn't go. For instance, that the humans have to be at least sitting on the loop, making sure that there is no autonomous decisions to kill someone. Let's see how far it goes. Then you have a challenge of what happens when AI intersects with other scientific technological developments. So for instance, when AI starts creating new bombs, new biological weapons, or something like that. And that's a completely different niche, which is not cyber anymore.
Yeah.
It is technological security to some extent, but that's, I'm afraid it's going too slow in that direction. We're not discussing that much. OECD has some discussions about the challenges of new technologies and what happens. That's theoretical part. That's mapping some of the fields that exist. But I don't know if anyone wants to build it.
I can do the operational part where AI is used both by defenders and attackers. So you have, like Vlada said, the AI applied to developing different forms of attack, which can be as simple as a phishing email. So these were already getting more sophisticated even by people making them, but now you can make sure that, a phishing attack looks completely legitimate legitimate. But then on the other hand, you also have AI applications in defense systems. So like artificial intelligence automatically detecting some weird behavior on networks or devices and stuff like that. So, AI as AI can be both a friend and foe. It depends who has it in his hands.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think AI is, everybody's hyped up about AI, especially about generative AI. But in essence, AI can be an accelerator in certain operations, but it can also be used as a defensive agent to then respond to operations or detect operations. So I don't, honestly, at this point, I think we have a chance that AI will not be a game changer. However, having said that, there are all sorts of other technological developments on the horizon that will be game changers. And some of those we haven't even conceived of yet. But I'm fairly certain AI will have an impact, certainly. I believe that quantum computing will have a big impact because it will require new encryption mechanisms. I believe that
Neural technology.
Yeah, neurotechnology will have an impact because it will sort of bridge the distinction between organisms and computers, basically calculators, and the metaverse will have a huge impact on us, and it will blur the distinction between physical reality and virtual reality. So all these will be new developments, and there will be challenges to international peace and security as well.
There is one interesting, well, an ad, an unpaid ad, an interesting blockbuster which is called Anon, like Anonymous, Anon. I think 5, 6, 7 years ago. Take a look at that, which talks about when the augmented reality is integrated into our view and lenses and the minds, and then someone starts hacking. Interesting science fiction.
But bottom line answer to your question is yes, indeed.
Or
we
as
have
Facebook
also
would say, it's
take it into
complicated.
consideration. We have some 5 minutes at our disposal. Any questions? As far as I can see, Tanya, please.
Well, for everyone, Tanya, who is mentioned during this session, Tanya Maras from Regional Cooperation Council. Well, actually, it's not a question. Maybe it's more a comment or to elaborate on the topic. For sure, all things that have been said stands. But, again, it is a matter of cooperation. All the topics that you're mentioning, answers on the questions, everything is again related to some type of cooperation. We as an institution, as the Regional Cooperation Council, for sure, we try to maintain this dialogue, and as my colleague mentioned, from 2018, actually when we had a multi-annual action plan, MAPRE, where we supported the region actually to form in each economy national CSIRT. And of course, fostering that, strengthening that, and maintaining that to a regional cybersecurity conference that was actually organized annually. Mm-hmm. For sure, because of the COVID and the situation that everything went online, we were not feasible to do that. But as already mentioned, the European Commission started a project to support the Western Balkan economies by conducting the study for gaps and needs and see what they need, the support, what type of the support, is that capacity building, is that funds, is that a legal aspect, different type of frameworks. What we wanted to actually support again coming on this field also was by organizing again cybersecurity conference this year, but actually our approach was this whole of society approach. Mm. We brought partners. And I'm talking just about the governments for the Western Balkans. I'm also mentioning the donors, IFIs, academia, NGOs. We wanted to actually have all of them around the table to discuss about the major issues that are happening in the region, but of course also to reflect this on the situation that is happening in the EU. But of course, what was most, let's say, focus given was actually the attacks, the recent attacks at that moment that happened in the region, and that was actually the focus. We saw the situation, and let's say the severe attack was in Montenegro, because they more than half a year, they were not even to communicate. Yeah. They were not able to receive any email or to respond on that email. So then actually you see how weak, let's say, sometimes the system is. And actually that the government can see the need of this capacity that is actually mentioned to the panel as well. So it's not just one thing that needs to be done or supported. And of course, as you mentioned to the panel, is also involving the different partners, different stakeholders. But again, each one of them, let's say that maybe should focus on the role that they can give and support the region, and institutions that maybe not in the session, but should be recognized as Regional Cooperation Council, is the one that can support the region in maintaining the dialogue and support in the Western Balkans at least. So with this, actually, I'm just giving a comment and also opening for you a question to tell us whether do you see, first, Regional Cooperation Council per se, because we are a political organization that can support the region, is really an institution that needs to provide, this type of institution to provide support, political one, and on what level? Or is more actually on the governments? Because we know that each government actually needs to provide additional capacity within their economy. We know that this is really, as was mentioned, this is a sexy topic now because of these severe attacks that we had. But this actually should be the topic from, let's say, beginning, because technology is going just straight forward. It's not asking and it's not stopping. So
Thank you. Thank
what
you,
do you
Tanya.
think?
Thank you. Quickly, do you have still...
It's not that we haven't been thinking about causing an attack so that the high-level people would finally understand, but a controlled one. No, I'm kidding. But there are so many attacks actually that unfortunately they had to happen in Albania and Montenegro and other places so that the high-level people understand. Kudos to RCC for organizing this, because I think this is really important. Whether you have a role to play, absolutely. I think there is much to be done on a national level, but you can bring it up on the political agenda.
Yeah.
So that's certain.
Yeah, I'd agree. I mean, we know that at least in Serbia, we now have small pockets in the diplomatic corps that are interested in cyber, and I think that wherever you can find those in the countries of the region, just jump on them, and also utilize existing networks like public-private partnerships or any kind of dialogue that's already formed in the country, rely on them to support further capacity development of these diplomatic representatives.
Well, with this is really annoying, you know. This is blinking like in red, so I mean, meaning that I have to wrap it up and finish this panel.
Supposed to be annoying.
That's right.
It's like a cyber attack.
I would like to really thank you for your intervention. For me, it was really informative, really constructive. I hope it was the same for the audience. We got several very clear messages, and especially for RCC, our organization. We will be having a political mandate as much as countries are, or economies as we call them, are ready to give it to us. But that's another story. I want to thank the audience once again, and with this I think we are finishing this panel. Thank you very much for your attention, and yeah.
We're waiting for the